So before we reconcile the POS clearing for June, I'd like to quickly remind you what we did for May. So let's go to the POS clearing. This is history by account in the reconciliation. We can view the report right here. And if you'll remember, we actually made the statement ending balance 0, and we made the period ending date June 2nd. And this is because the sales for May, specifically the last day of May, May 31st, they're going to go into the bank the next business day. And what I was doing in this scenario is I was saying, see, this is the received payment that I cleared. I said, we should be seeing $494.68 come into the bank by debit and credit, so by POS, regarding the monthly store sales. That's what the monthly store sales report for May said. It said, this is how much we earned, this is how much was paid by cash, and this is how much was paid by debit or credit for sales between May 1st and May 31st. And then we clicked off the related deposits that added up to $494.68. And by doing this, that is why the statement ending balance is 0. This is just one method for POS reconciliation. It's the method that I use. And it works because if we want to know how that $494.68 came into the bank, we've got a record right here of all those items that did. But not everything on June 2nd was related to May. Because June 1st was on the weekend and June 2nd is the Monday, one of the June 2nd deposits was related to May 31st, and one of the June 2nd deposits was related to June 1st. And because our total paid by POS or by Moneris was on the monthly basis, May 1st to May 31st, that means that this $75.98 that was related to June 1st, that's going to be going into the bank on June 2nd. Now, this works when your debit credit processor splits up the June 2nd deposit, right? So if it's putting in the May 31st deposit separately than the June 1st deposit on June 2nd, we can then do a statement ending balance of 0. But there are debit and credit processing merchants who put in combined deposits combined for more than one day. I have even seen Moneris do it as well, though it does it not as often. But there are other very popular payment processors that do combined deposits. But if Moneris had put in the $85.83 and the $75.98 together as one number, as one deposit, part of it related to May and part of it related to June, we wouldn't be able to put in the 0 statement ending balance. And that is because we couldn't click off just $85.83 because it's like a bigger number. In this scenario, we would actually have to put a statement ending balance of negative $85.83, indicating that we've gotten almost all of it, but we're still waiting on $85.83. Now, how would we know what portion of that deposit on June 2nd, $85.83 was for May and $75.98 for June? How would we know what portion of that deposit was related to May and what portion was related to June? And that is why we needed the Moneris statement for June, because that's exactly what I'm going to illustrate in June in two different ways. I'm going to represent it with Moneris, and I'm also going to represent it with Square with an extra level of complexity. So now with that refresher, let's go over to the bank reconciliations. So I'm just going to jump here. We're in POS clearing. I am going to just start with 0 just to crack it open. And as I said, we're not going to end on June 30th. We're going to end on July 2nd, and that's because July 1st is a holiday. So I'm going to say July 2nd, and just a caveat, Not every payment processing software puts it in the next business day. Sometimes it can take a couple of days. There's a lot of variation out there, which is why I wanted to illustrate looking at the statement to try and figure it out. So let's go ahead and pop this open. Now you'll notice that none of these have been clicked off. That's because we don't have like the POS bank feed, right? Like we've got the bank feed, we can see what's cleared the bank general ledger, but it's a Moneris clearing account. It's not a real bank account in real life. It's just where we've been putting the deposits so that we can make sure that they match the amount we say was paid by debit and credit from the sales report. So we could click every single one of these off if we wanted, or just go boop and select them all like that. Now it is going to be off, of course, because down at the bottom, some of this is going to be related to June and some of it's going to be related to July. Now, when we did the May one, we could just sort of play and click up back and forth to see how the permutation works to make it get to 0. We didn't need the statement. We were able to figure it out. There was only 2. It was either this one or that one, and we got to 0. We actually didn't need the statement. But now you can see that it doesn't work. And sometimes what I do when it doesn't work is I just pop it forward one more day just to see if there's any more information for me. Usually not, but I do that's one of the things that I do is sometimes try and see if there's anything a little further along. So here I don't see any extra information on July 3rd. So this does lead me to believe that these are probably a combination of a bit of June 30th and a bit of July 1st. So how would we know what portion of these 3 is June and what portion is July? And that's when we need the Moneris statement. So let's go ahead and open the Moneris statement up. So here's the Moneris statement for June. They can get a bit convoluted, not just Moneris, they all have a lot to say. So these are the totals by card, and these are the different rates for each of the different cards. We got some more totals. We got some Moneris fees going on. But if we keep scrolling, there's a couple of sections that can be helpful. We've got the daily activity summary, and then down here, we have the financial details. So the financial details, this is just the money going into the bank, but it doesn't tell us much about what the money is going into the bank other than the sales tax, which we used before. So let's see if we can garner some more information regarding the daily activity summary. So we're going to look here at the end of the month. And when you're trying to sort of make sense of these merchant statements, I always just try to follow the money. Like basically there is on June 28th, we've got some payments by card. Do I see any of these numbers at all going into the bank? So let's take a look. So here are the deposits going into the bank. I know it says payment here, but that's because it's the clearing account. It goes into the bank out of the POS clearing. And can we see any numbers matching at all? Well, right here I see 118.05, 118.05 for the debit. And so that's going in on June 30th. And if we were to pull this over, we'll see that 118 is June 28th. Now, June 30th is a Monday, and so that's going to take in the sales for, in this case, like every merchant's going to be slightly different, but in this case, and also depends on when the business owner has the device push, whether it pushes at the end of the day or the beginning of the next one. There's so much variation out there. But in this case, we've got a deposit going in on June 30th. We see the 118 here. It's for June 28th. And it's because the payments for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, they're all going to go in on the Monday, June 30th. That's the pattern that we're going to see here. So we should then, if that's the case, see this Interact deposit of 84.11 also on June 30th. And there it is. So we're starting to see the pattern emerge. But then why are the Visa and the MasterCard not matching the amounts that we see on here? And if we take a closer look, it's this daily activity summary is actually just summarizing what happened for the day, meaning to say there was $38.93 in Visa payments received. And then there was the Visa processing charge. So for the day, this is the net amount of activity for the day regarding Visa. So we can actually see that it's this column, the net sales of $38.93, that we should see for Visa going in on June 30th. So let's see, $38.93. And indeed, there it is, $38.93. $38.93. So $25.39, $25.39. So now we're starting to see a pattern emerge. So if that's the case, now can we figure out how much of this debit and Visa and MasterCard on July 2nd is related to the June 30th payments? And take a look, and theoretically, it would be this Interact portion and this MasterCard portion that is included in the July 2nd deposit. And it sums it up for us here. It says that the total activity for net sales for June 30th is $260.83. You might have seen that already. That is exactly how much we are out. So we're getting there. So what are our options in this case? Well, the first option is, since we know that up to here, this 9493.96 includes all of the Moneris deposits for June 1st to June 29th, we can just say here on our edit info that $260.83 is our ending balance. That is not all of the total POS payments for June that we said are going to be checked off in this statement. So I'm going to hit save. Now we've got the 0, and what it's saying is everything here has been accounted for except for $260.83. That is going to be accounted for when we do the POS clearing reconciliation for July. So that's one way of doing it. Now, I didn't just plug in a number to make 0. I did actually go to the statement and figure out how much is not being deposited in June because of that split payment deposit in July. We did find that $260.83 right here. And you'll see why in a moment, why that's very, very important. So before moving on, the first method for reconciling the POS, when there is a deposit in the next month that is combined for a portion of June and a portion of July, a portion of the month you're reconciling and a portion of the next, this is a combined payment. That is when we have to figure out what portion of these deposits is related to June, and we put in that in the ending balance. So that's one method of doing it. And I'm going to show another method that allows us to have the ending balance at 0. So let's put that 0 back in. So I'm going to hit save, and we're off again by the $260.83. Once we've calculated how much of this $9493.96 was deposited in June and how much was deposited in July, we can actually split this entry. So let's go over here and edit it. So I'm going to say minus $260.83 right here. I'll hit tab. So that's the portion that was deposited in June. I'm going to hit save. And in fact, we'll go save and new. And I'm going to pull up monthly store sales again. And I'm going to date this June 30th as well. It is in the clearing account. So this is just noting how much we're still expecting. $260.83 is the amount that we're expecting in July. And I'm going to go save and close. And now back in our POS reconciliation, now you can see because we've split that monthly sales payment in two, we can say this $923.13 is related to this, and that's going to leave this $260.83 for us to carry forward into the next POS reconciliation that we do for July. So that's a second option in order to deal with when you've got payments going in through July that have some for June and some for July. Generally, for me, it's just easier to put into the info here how much I know is going to be part of the July POS reconciliation, and then I can go ahead and just click off the full monthly store sales, and I know I've accounted for all of it. So I did mention that we did figure out that 260.83 and why that was important, because there are other things that you're trying to catch. You might not get that difference of 0 once you figure this out. So let's go up here and see how there is this Visa, this missed payment Visa deposit. So a lot of times learning bookkeepers will see a Moneris amount coming out of the bank and think that that is actually a Moneris fee. So we can take a closer look at this and we can see that we put it to POS clearing as an expense, like it came out of the bank, because I explained during the bank fee clearing that it said deposit, so it was related to the Visa deposits. So if we had instead actually said processing fees and thinking this was a Moneris fee and said save and close, yep. Now you can see that we're actually out 45.14. So we know for sure that that 260.83, that is the June 30th. So if we've resolved what's going on here at the end of the month, we know there is more to look into. So one solution, of course, would just be to look up the 45.14 and we'd see, oh, look, there's something, there's a clue. Maybe this isn't a fee. And also, if we were to come over here into the Moneris statement and sort of look up that number as well, so Control F, 45.14. So here is where it's coming out of the bank. It's still called Visa Sales and Refunds. And then if we go to next, here we're back in the daily activity summary. And here's what actually happened on June 16th. You can see the store received $114.13 in payments from Visa. And they also issued a refund of $159.27 in Visa. And so the net of that activity is the negative 45.14. That's why these say in the daily activity summary that it's the sales and the refunds combined. And that is why the 45.14, again, a lot of people just see money coming out from Moneris and think it's a fee. So having the POS reconciliation is definitely very important to make sure that we've got everything allocated correctly and it's all balancing well. So let's put this back to the POS clearing. Save and close. Yep. And now we can come down, check that off, and we have now come to the difference of 0. We've reconciled the POS clearing for June. So the reason I really wanted to crack this open and sort of show how it can work when everything goes well is because in this case, the Shopify at Grand Gate Gardens is directly connected to the Moneris processing. So there's no human typos that can occur. This is not always the case. So let's consider, for example, a restaurant. Some restaurants, not all, but a lot of them, they'll have a sales register that is separate from their payment processing machine. They're not connected. So what will happen is a patron comes in, they order food and drink, and then the server, they punch in the food and drink that is ordered into the sales register, and then the sales register will print out a total, a receipt for the food and drink. This is how much that patron owes. So then the server grabs the debit credit machine and they go on over to the table and they say, here's how much your food and drink costs, that first receipt. And then they say, how would you like to pay? And then the patron will say, oh, I would like to pay by card. Oh, they say, says the server, I have a machine right here. So then the server has to manually punch in the amount on that receipt into the payment machine before handing it over to the patron. That moment right there is one opportunity for a typo to happen between the sales register and the debit and credit processing machine. So there's one issue when the register and the payment machine is not connected. And you will always get typos because that's a human thing to do. But there is another problem with the chain as well. So let's say that patron, they decide to pay with their Visa card. So they pay by their Visa card, they give a tip, you know. And so then what the server does is the server needs to go back to the sales register and tell the sales register two things. Manually typing in the sales register based on the receipt that they got from that debit credit machine is they say, first of all, they have to tell the register this bill was paid by Visa. And they can get that wrong. They can accidentally say Amex or MasterCard or debit or cash. That's a typo that I see happen a lot as well. And they also have to tell the register, and this is how much was paid in tip, because the sales register often helps us to reconcile what tips go into the bank and all that. So they've got all that typing to do. They've got all that manual entry. And when that happens, not only is there more work for the server, but now it's going to be very rare that you get that happy zero. And that's where register over under is part of reconciling this POS clearing. If we have explored all of the reasons why this might be wrong, if we have made sure that we've figured out the split payment, what's going in the next month, if we've made sure we've caught all of the refunds or any typos or things that we might have missed, like it's not just a refund, maybe there's a random discover that you haven't set up a rule for and it went to another clearing account. Once you've explored all the problems, when you now have that difference, now you have to add one more entry. It is an expense entry paid by POS Clearing, or it's a deposit to POS Clearing. That is the over-under expense. And that over-under adjustment that we have to make each month is an important piece of information too for the business owner. How much is going on because of typos throughout the month. So now you can see why reconciling POS clearing is a very important task to be done every month. And even though it can get complicated, it is worth the work to have accurate and useful financials for the business owner. Also, not every business owner reconciles their register cash, and I would suggest that this does need to be done because that over-under is part of, you know, the human error of the cash register, but also you want to make sure that there's nobody sort of taking money from the cash register also. It's especially important, say, in a restaurant or some establishment where there's tips, because a lot of times there's tips that are paid by debit and credit, and so then money has to be taken out of the bank in order to be able to pay the servers. So there's a lot of cash sort of flying around in the restaurant industry. So we want to reconcile our cash registers, and we want to reconcile our POS clearing account. And now we can go ahead and finish now. Excellent. And we have reconciled our Moneris POS clearing for the month. So that was one example of reconciling a clearing account where there was a July 2nd deposit that had a little bit of deposit related to June sales and a little bit of the deposit related to July sales. Now, with this Moneris example, Moneris specifically, they take out the fees at the end of the day or at the end of the month, separate from the deposit that went in. So right here, these deposits into the bank, if we were to scroll up to the daily activity, we didn't see $37.98 going into the bank from the Visa. We saw the $38.93, and the fees are being pulled separately from the deposit. So reconciling a clearing account that has a deposit in 1 month that has some sales from July and some sales from June and also withholds the fees, that gets a little more interesting. And we get to look at that together right now with the Square clearing. So let's go ahead, open up that statement. It's not actually a statement. What this is a printout that Sarah gave us from the Square dashboard. So in this case study, she has the Moneris connected to Shopify at her store. She also has a department in her business that does garden installations. And in order to process those payments, she signed up with Square, and she has a Square machine that she can take out into the field and get payment right from the homeowner out in the field. And so that's why she has Moneris and Square, and I decided that so that I could show you both in a case study. So here is the Square dashboard for June, and what this is telling us is that for June, there's been sales of $2,950. The taxes in there were $383. There were no tips. So in total collected was $3,333.50. Just a side note, sometimes when people use Square just for payment processing, it might not break out the taxes. They might just hand a separate invoice and just use Square to process the full payment. So that's always something that you want to think about when you're working with Square. So moving further down the dashboard, it says no cash was processed through Square, but for the total of $3,333.50, it was all paid by card, debit or credit, and the total fees that were held back by Square was $25.28. So therefore, we should expect to see $3,308.22 coming into our bank related to the June Square payments of this total collected right here, $3,333.50. So let's go ahead and see where this might cause us some work. So let's go to the Square clearing. And again, we're going to put the ending balance of 0 to start. It wants me to actually say 0. And let's bump this ahead to July 3rd. And go ahead and start reconciling. And again, same scenario as with the Moneris, is nothing is checked off as quote unquote cleared because we're not reconciling a bank. We're doing a clearing account. This is the other side of those transactions. So for example, we have a client, Eileen, who paid with Square. We received payment of $565. Now we didn't say that that $565 went into the bank. We said it went into a clearing account. And then when we actually saw money come into the bank from Square, this $560.69, that the other side of that transaction is cleared and reconciled with the bank. And now we're dealing with it in this sort of clearing account or holding account. So in May, I did talk about how to do Square deposits on an individual basis, which is fine if you only have 2 or 3 a month. But if you've got a bunch, then we'll just use a clearing account. And this is me showing you how to use a clearing account. So May was actually pretty straightforward. So here is Eileen, the money coming into the clearing account for $565. And then the money that went into the bank was only $560.69. And back in May, we had that payment receipt that showed us that the fees related to this $565 was $431. And so you can see that is how we reconcile. That is how we get to 0. We say, this is how much we said was paid. This is how much came into the bank. And this is how much Square says the fees are. So let's keep going. We've got a payment from Mini Cooper of $200. I bet you that $198 is related to it. And then Mini Cooper pays us again a little later. And then we get something from Carol. I'm seeing the names right here. And there's a Square deposit of $1,401.77. So it doesn't go to 0 right now is because we haven't put in the Square fees yet for June. And then we have a payment of $1,721 from Joe King on June 30th. Then on July 1st, Paige gives us $200. And then we get the Square deposit of $1,906.45. This is another example of a deposit on July 2nd that has a bit of July 1st, a bit of June 30th, has fees related to June and some fees related to July, and all we've been told is the total fees for June is $25.28. So let's go ahead, we'll put in those fees of $25.28. So I'm gonna go New Expense, and from Square, payment account was Square Clearing, so we're using the clearing account to put these fees in. And I'm going to date it June 30th, and this is just all of the June Square fees. Payment processing fees of, and that was $25.28, and that is 0 rated, and we're going to go save and close. So let's go ahead and check that off, and we're off by $1.57. So our spidey senses are probably telling us that $1.57 are the Square fees of the 200. Now, this is a very simple example, and so I want to show how to get there logically based on the paperwork, just like we did with the Moneris statement. So going back to how we did Moneris, if there is a deposit that is combining 2 different months, then what I do is I don't put the closing balance at 0. I put the closing balance of and what we're still waiting for. Right? We were still waiting for the 260.85. In this case, we're still waiting for the 1721. So let's start off with that. We're still waiting for 1721. And you can see we're still off by $12.98. And that is because a portion of these June Square fees are actually being deducted right here in this deposit in July. So the way that I deal with it, and again, you can see there's many different ways to get there, but this is the way that I deal with it, is I want to know of this 172100, how much are those fees that we're also still waiting for? And this is why I asked Sarah for just what the fees are on this 1721, and I asked her to jump over to Square, pull up the transaction, and take a look. And this is what she gave us. So let's go back to those deposits. And you'll remember that we had those Square payment details. And if we scroll down after, like she had to print screen for this, but when you pull out the payment details, it'll say right here that the fees was 1298, and that from this 1721, only 1,708 was transferred into our bank. So that number, 1702802, that is the number that we're technically still waiting for that we'll see in July. That is the amount that I put in to this edit info, what we're still waiting for, 1708.02, and let's hit save. And now I've gotten to that 0 balance. Now I've confirmed that I have put in all the sales paid by Square. I've allocated all of the deposits in from Square. I have all of the Square fees in correctly. And there have been no typos or punching in typos from a user on the Square device. So there are many different ways to deal with Square clearing accounts. Every single one is going to be different. I didn't go into all of the ways, but I did just address a couple of them and how I handle those different scenarios. And hopefully that's enough information to push you off into the payment processing world to be able to solve the problems that come your way. Let's go ahead and hit finish now. Done. And so now we've gone through all of the paperwork for June, week number 5. And for June, we've reconciled all the bank accounts. We've reconciled the clearing accounts. Now, what is left for us to do? Well, we want to do our end of month check, and also HST for April to June is due on or before the end of July in this case study. And so once we've finished our end of month checks, then we can go ahead and prepare the GST HST for filing for the period ending June 30th. But first, let's start with our end of month checks.